Good evening. The body of one of the victims of the plane crash in the Southern Alps on Tuesday may have to remain in the mountains northwest of Queenstown until the spring thaw. Rescuers have recovered 9 bodies, but the 10th, one of the overseas tourists who died, lies buried in snow and ice at the foot of the avalanche caused by the crash.
The Air Force spent the day ferrying search and rescue personnel into the mountains where the plane crashed, killing all 10 people on board. The recovery teams have been probing the avalanche deposit, where they believe the last of the bodies lies. This is where the search has been concentrated for the last 2 days. The wreckage and the bodies of the victims were strewn down the mountainside. 3 were buried in an avalanche which came down after the crash. The Inspector of Air Accidents was back again. He flew in to inspect the crash site high above the search area, then prepared the wreckage to be flown out. The dogs spent the morning searching, but the scent's growing cold. Today they found a shoe. Yesterday, 2 of the victims' bodies.
We'd only been searching for about 10 minutes and he just made a very definite line up the hill, stopped right where the body was and stayed by it till I came up to him, kept looking back.
We've just learnt that the search has been called off, with 1 body still missing.
Meanwhile, in Invercargill, a team of police, pathologists and dentists were successful in identifying the 9 bodies brought down off the mountain yesterday. In several cases, dental records were used. In others, photo ID cards were found still on the deceased. Personal effects were identified and catalogued for eventual return to the families. All the next of kin of the North American tourists and the Wanaka pilot have been kept fully informed of the situation. The identification team members will undergo a special debriefing. Following the identification, the bodies are being made available to the families.
Widespread fog has caused major disruption for passengers wanting to fly in and out of Dunedin Airport. Dozens of people were left waiting around at the airport before the fog finally lifted and air services resumed just after 1 o'clock. The airport had been closed since late yesterday afternoon. Invercargill was closed for only half an hour and no flights were affected. Meanwhile, this truck ran off the road in foggy conditions just north of Balclutha. The driver was taken to Balclutha Hospital for treatment and later discharged. Invercargill people can expect to see big changes soon in the Otapuni Creek Reserve, the scenic but flood-prone area that runs through the central city. Work started on a $6 million flood protection scheme that could see dozens of trees come out to make way for stop banks and big changes in the creek's much photographed bridges, Michael Lynch reports.
Some of the trees on the Otapuni Reserve could be living on borrowed time. Catchment Board and council officials inspected the area today to see just which trees will have to go. For after years of discussion, New Zealand's most expensive urban flood protection scheme is all go. The reserve's a picture today, but every time the city gets a flood, it's one of the first places to go under. The government coughed up a 60% subsidy, nearly double the normal rate, and now there's a rush to get the work done before the offer runs out in 2 years. Banks will be built up all the way down the reserve, culverts are being replaced, and a total of 7 bridges are being turned into wing dams to get the water flowing under some control. The council's promising, though, to preserve as much of the picturesque bridge railings as possible.
We're going to keep every bit of it that we can. We've got a commitment to that.
And keeping every bit of tree here that you can?
Yes, as much as can be saved, as much as can be left in its original state. That's the aims and object of the whole development.
But something's going to have to change to give you flood protection.
Well, that's the facts of life. If you want protection, and we need it, then we're going to have to put up with some disruption.
But when it comes down to the line, the Catchment Board's the first to admit there's no such thing as absolute flood protection for a place like Invercargill.
The rainfall is certainly going to be more intense, but providing we can detain some of the waters there and provide a reasonable degree of protection down through the city with flood banks, then will allow the people to plan out of it. It's a risk management exercise we're looking at, and someone's got to make a decision that we plan off the floodplain in the future.
But in the meantime, the face of Invercargill's pretty little reserve will be changing soon as a price of progress.
He's outspoken, his methods are brash, his message is driven home by a sledgehammer, and he's an alcoholic. But Murray Deaker, a former King's High School student, is one of the most aggressive campaigners in New Zealand against addiction to alcohol and drugs. On a rare trip back to Dunedin, he returned to his old stamping ground.
You know, you might be getting on with your boss and putting the hard
When
work
Murray
into the
Deaker
hard
left
work in.
Kings High in 1962, teachers of those times could never in their wildest dreams have foreseen the day that he'd ever be welcomed back. But that's exactly what did happen to the brash schoolboy of 62.
He was like the rooster that thought the sun had risen to hear him crow.
And those words from the 62 school mag were prophetic indeed. Today, Deaker is still as loud and audacious as ever. But what he had to tell the boys of Kings High came from the heart. An alcoholic who tried to mix brilliant sporting and academic careers with alcoholic excesses, Deaker has become the driving force and, at full volume, the mouthpiece of FADE, the Foundation for Alcohol and Drug Education.
The last couple of years that I was at university and marijuana first came into Dunedin, we were told that if you smoked dope, you became sexier, more potent, and everybody would be chasing you around. Well, I never needed to try that because I'm so good looking anyway, you see.
But Deaker's knack of relating to youngsters has a barb to it.
What I want to say to you is this, that if we have a drink today and you have a couple of Steinlagers when you get home, you'll squirt it out and it'll be out of your system tomorrow. 24 hours for alcohol to leave the system. If you are silly enough to have a joint on the way home, that joint will remain in your system for up to 30 days.
You accept straight out that you're an alcoholic. If you weren't, could you fully understand the problem?
No, I couldn't. I'd say that. I don't think I'd be as highly motivated. It's been a bit of an emotional scene for me to come back to the South Dunedin, where probably I did a lot of our drinking and have got a lot of friends. And I look around and, you know, it brings back a lot of memories, some of which still haunt me.
If this was typical of a New Zealand school, what percentage of boys here would be related with drugs?
In all schools in New Zealand, Ken, it doesn't vary. 1 in 5 use marijuana, 1 in 2 use alcohol. About 50% are using some form of pill. Some of them are prescribed. But I think most people would be surprised to learn that our survey of 25,000 New Zealand secondary school pupils showed very clearly there's no difference between Auckland and the rest of the country.
There's an expression around these days, been there, done that. Murray Deaker is that expression personified.
Murray Deaker talking with Ken Nicholson. That's it from us tonight. Take care. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night.